Hi, welcome everybody. This is the UH School of Art 47th Master of Fine Arts Thesis exhibition. This is the second iteration of our artist gallery talks. We had one last week and we will have one next week as well. So if you're interested, please come back. Today we are going to be hearing from Abbie Edmonson, Hannah Bender, and Daniel Zamora. There is lunch provided afterwards. If you would like to stay for lunch, we highly encourage it. We welcome it. It's a thank you for being here and for participating in our programming today. My name is Claudia Moreno. I am the Graduate Fellow for Contemporary Art here at Blaffer. I have gotten to know the artists in this show really well throughout the course of putting on this exhibition. I have to say that I find them very wonderful people, and I think their art is thrilling, and it's really exciting to see the show come together. Everyone has such unique view of the world that these talks are essential to hearing more about who the artists are, what their work means to them, and what their practice is like. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. This is Abbie Edmonson from Georgia. She is a ceramic artist and object maker who is owner and creator of HTX Clay, which is in Northside. She has exhibited at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, San Angelo Museum of Fine Arts, MWSU Clay Guild in Missouri, and much more. Abbie will be earning her MFA in sculpture this spring. Everyone, please welcome Abbie.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Abbie Edmonson, and I am an object maker, a sculptor of soft and hard materials. I began my artistic career as a ceramic artist, so for many years I was working at my own studio doing functional ceramics, and I believe it was right after the end of 2020 I was feeling really burned out. I had done a really large collaboration with a large company, and also it was the year after COVID had come, and just feeling very, just a lot of questions around grief and loss and just feeling overwhelmed. And so for me, I felt like there was more that I wanted to say with my work. And so I started thinking about going back to get my master's. And so I decided to apply and I got in. And so when I got here, I felt like there was just more things that I could say outside of what my functional ceramics was able to do and say. And so I started my first 2 years, I didn't work with clay or ceramics at all. I really wanted to challenge myself to work with materials that could say something more. So I started working with paper, wood, metal, found objects, and for me, in ways, it was a revisiting of some practices that I lost when I was really focusing on making functional ceramics, running a business, being a full-time artist. So a lot of it was a reclamation, words are hard, of finding that space again to be able to use those materials. 2 weeks before I started grad school, my husband and I had a house fire, and I remember coming into the program holding a lot and feeling a lot of grief, a lot of loss, a lot of sadness, a lot of anger. And as artists do, we start questioning, how do we process this? And so for me, it meant going back to our house and scavenging, picking up, collecting pieces of wood that were lost in the fire, pieces of our kitchen that were scattered, burned vinyl, whatever it was. It didn't make sense. I was just gathering these things and bringing them back into my studio and really trying to figure out what to do with that loss, what to do with that sadness. And it became a catalyst for me in many ways because I was able to realize that I could bring these materials that have memory, that have emotion tied to them, and I could create something from destruction, and I could create something that meant something to me, that had value. And so it was a really cathartic way of working. So with that being said, my work is deeply rooted in my personal journey with mental health, exploring themes of what I like to call inherited grief, familial experiences, particularly with my mother and my grandmother. Within the Southern Bible Belt of Georgia is where I grew up. My work often critiques the restrictive expectations placed on women within this cultural and religious context. To be seen, not heard, submissive, be chaste, smile. These are all things that I was told as a young girl growing up. I investigate the impact of these influences on emotional well-being and the search for my authentic identity. Ultimately, my art is about healing, is about visibility, about fostering connection with the viewer through shared human experiences. So this work in particular in the gallery, I'm thinking a lot about interiors of self, interiors of spaces that reflect and then guide us back to ourselves. So using sculptures, installations, and objects, I use them as containers. So whether that be ceramic vessels or reliquaries or a domestic kitchen space, they all become places and spaces that can hold memory, grief, time, joy, celebration, and even tears. For me, these interiors are a reflection of what I had inherited, whether I wanted to or not. So sometimes that means depression, grief, and the memory of who we are and how we got here.
Let's give Abbie some snaps. Thank you so much. I'm going to join you for a little informal question and answer period. If this sparks anything in any of you, I know that we have some students here from a fiber class. Please feel free to raise your hand and add to this question and answer period. But we're going to get it started with just a couple of questions for Abbie. I think we should dive into your label of object maker. I feel like that's a really clear distinction, and I want to know what that term means to you.
Yeah. So from a young age, I have always been admirer and collector of objects. So whether that was my grandmother's trinkets on her dresser, whether it was jewelry, I'm wearing her ring today, or it was maybe my mother's collection of teapots. I have always been really drawn to objects and the meaning attached to them, mementos, the idea of they hold value. And so for me, it just feels really aligned with the work that I want to create as an object maker. And then two, I feel like it gives me a lot of freedom as an artist. For a long time, I labeled myself as a ceramic artist. For a while, I was a painter. I'm getting my MFA in sculpture, but I feel like being an object maker incorporates so much of those things and allows me to have a lot of freedom in the studio. One of my favorite artists that I've looked at for a long time kind of gave me that language, Theaster Gates. He called himself an object maker, and I don't know if you know his history, but he started as a ceramic artist, a potter. He was throwing on the wheel. So for me, as he progressed in his career and I followed along, it gave me the permission, I guess, to also do the same. And so it really kind of guided my thoughts around what it means to be an object maker.
Beautiful. You do mention you have this rich ceramic background, and I noticed these vessels behind us, you've chosen to leave some of them unglazed, fired only one time. Can you talk to us about the significance of that choice? What does it mean for the vessels themselves? And then also, what does that communicate to you?
Yeah, so these vessels are very different from what I would normally do pre-grad school. They're coil built. I usually am a wheel thrower, and like I said, I really wanted to do things that got me out of my comfort zone, that really slowed me down, and hand building is one of those things that is very meticulous for me. And I'm just thinking about these coils that I'm kind of creating and what is being held in these containers. I chose to, one, only fire them once, especially, so the 3 white ones are only fired once, and it's what we would call that, like, they're not vitrified, or they're not fully mature, so they're more fragile, they're more porous. The black one is the only one that has been fired twice, and it is more mature, it's more stable, which kind of speaks to some of the narratives I'm talking about in this piece behind me. I decided not to glaze them because I wanted them to not be watertight. I wanted them to still be porous. So if you were to put water inside, they would sweat or cry. And so that very much aligns with this idea of holding emotion, holding grief, and thinking through those things.
Wow, that's really powerful. The idea of grief is something you use in these other few sculptures in this show, and you use toilet paper as a material. Can you say a little bit more about that choice?
So toilet paper, if you don't know my story, it might seem a little odd. Toilet paper was used as a receptacle for grief and tears in my house growing up. It was kind of a signal on whether or not my mom had a good day or a bad day when I came home from school. And so in our house growing up, we used it to kind of wipe tears. And so I think the work and the materials that I'm really thinking about is how do I convey my personal narrative, my personal story into something larger. I think we chatted too just about the vulnerability of being able to share such personal narratives. And I remember after the opening on Friday night, I had what I think Brene Brown calls a vulnerability hangover. I was feeling very raw, but also very empowered. And the important part of this whole process for me was these are really personal stories, and they include my mom and my grandmother. And my grandmother's no longer living, but my mom is. And it was important for me to talk with her about these poems that I've written and kind of the language that I am bringing up in this work, because it's not just my story, it's her story as well. And for me, it became an ethical question as an artist of whether or not I should share this with her. I think past Abbie probably would not have, out of fear of what she might say or to protect her, but I felt like it was important to bring her into this work. And I think we had a really good dialogue about it, and it shows the growth and the place that she's at in her life, that she was able to receive it as her wording a gift, to be able to sit with it and feel like she saw herself within the work.
I think it's really beautiful. I do have to ask, is it important to you that your audience knows your story, the background of it, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's hard for them not to. I feel like a lot of it is so personal. Inevitably, you're going to connect with what my story and what I'm sharing. But my hope is that you find resonance with your own self, your own life, your own story. I think for me, I have to start from a place of, does it move me? Does it make me feel something? I talk a lot about this with my husband around, if it doesn't make me feel anything or move me, then how can I expect anyone else to ask that of them as well? He actually shared with me a speech by Howard Thurman called The Sound of the Genuine. And it's a beautiful speech. If you haven't listened to it, he shared it with me, and it's something we talk a lot about in our household. And it's basically Howard Thurman asked the question, who are you, to start the speech. And he goes on to basically talk about the point to where you get to the most genuine part of yourself, where you're able to have that and it comes out of you and reach down into somebody else and find the genuine in them. And I think that is what I really strive for within my work.
Thank you, Abbie.
Yeah, thanks.
I want to give you guys a chance to ask any questions that have come into your brains, that have been percolating there, maybe since you first saw the work, maybe since you were seeing it again today. There might be hands. The question is, does anybody have any questions about the work?
I'm curious, are you an artist who meticulously plans out based around your concepts, or do you work intuitively?
My honest answer is I do not plan a lot of times. I am pretty intuitive, to my detriment sometimes. I think when I'm preparing for a show like this, I tend to be pretty intuitive, but I do realize that I have to spend a lot of time writing and reading and kind of sitting with my thoughts because they are so personal. I feel like anytime I don't do that, they feel less authentic. And so I think it's both. I'm trying to be more planned, but in the studio when I'm working with materials, it's very intuitive. Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
May I ask what you use to bind the toilet paper together?
Yeah, just glue and water. So I'm almost creating a paper mache of sorts, and I use a substrate on the backside of like the larger tapestry pieces, Duralar. It's just easy for me to be able to peel them off. And then when I'm making molds of objects with the toilet paper, I use Vaseline or some type of releasing agent on the object I'm making the mold from. Yeah.
Thank you for that question.
I feel like you had a question, yeah.
I wanted to ask about the color choices. I noticed you have sort of like a through line for all your pieces of this very off-white, light tan. And I was wondering where that came from, if it was intuitive, or if it's like a personal choice, or if it was maybe like a toilet paper with a star. I was curious.
Yeah, good question. I think, especially with some of my found objects, I try not to manipulate them too much. So the kitchen table is actually the kitchen table, not the exact one, but the same style of one that I had growing up in my house. The toilet paper, I haven't practiced or played a lot with manipulating the color. I really like using black and white and contrast within my work. So I have, at least for the past 3 years, really focused on black and white and not using color. And in some ways, there's a lot of tension within my work just in general. So black and white and contrasted, soft materials and hard materials, which is what I use to kind of describe myself as a sculptor. Things that are fragile and hard or long lasting. And I think for me, it's a further way to illustrate life itself. Kind of this waxing and waning of the human experience. There's a poet I really love, hope I'm pronouncing it right, Khalil Gibran, who talks about joy and sorrow and how you're suspended like scales between the two of them. And so a lot of my work is kind of this back and forth between that tension, and I think color plays a lot into that as well. Yeah.
So I was really intrigued by your aspect of creative writing and poetry. So I have two questions about it actually.
Okay.
My first one is, do you also have an intuitive creative process with your poetry?
Just for everyone
yeah.
else, the creative process behind the poetry that you write.
You know, I fight writing a lot, especially when it comes to like academic writing, I'll be honest with you. I feel much more at home within myself when I'm writing poetry or something that feels more emotional, I guess. And so my husband is a conversation partner with me a lot. He's an artist as well, and he's always pushing me to write more, and I resist until like the last minute because sometimes I think within the work I'm really scared to go too deep, scared that I might fall apart, scared that I might break open too much. But actually I've found that when I give in to the writing prompts or give in to writing poetry, it actually does the opposite. It opens up truths about myself and my family that I might not otherwise know. And so for me, it's kind of a Hail Mary in some ways, but I've learned that it's become really valuable and it's something that I want to start doing more. Yeah. Of course.
And then my other one is, do you have any
think intuition maybe. When I'm writing, it's very much like, is it automatic writing, where you're just kind of like really thinking, quickly writing down sentences, words, and I will often have to go back and rearrange. And I feel that's kind of how I work in the studio as well. I'm very much working on several things at one time and trying to figure out what this means maybe after I make it. And I feel sometimes that's how my writing, so there is definitely a parallel between those two things. Yeah, thanks.
All right. I hate to cut off such a rich discussion, but Abbie, thank you for being vulnerable with us, creating this space out of your own strength for us to feel the freedom to be vulnerable ourselves. And thank you for your words. All right, thank you guys for your patience. All programming is performance art of a sort, I guess. So thank you for participating. This is Hannah Bender. She is from Fort Smith, Arkansas. She holds a BFA from the University of Central Arkansas in graphic design. Thereafter, she took a studio assistantship with artist Taylor Smalls in Oakland before she moved to Houston. She teaches fundamentals of painting and silkscreen here at University of Houston and will graduate with an MFA in painting this spring. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi. My name's Hannah, and I'm 25. I say that to bring up that I'm reaching the end of my 20th consecutive year as an enrolled student in an institutional education. I came here and I had no clue I would be the youngest in the program, but it's really been a good process of growth. It's hard to say I would call myself a studio artist before getting here. My first studio was supposed to be in a attic space in the old art building at UCA, but COVID took me to my tiny apartment kitchen instead. I also felt weird calling myself an artist at the time. I thought the term to be like a sticker or a pin people could easily pick up, wear, and identify with. It never struck me until years later that the label of an artist could feel more like a brooch, complex, unique, and a keeper of meaning. That it could imply care, intention, time, and knowledge through its craft, rendering its own individuality. Perhaps the introduction of apps like Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest in my middle school iPod started to blur that definition for me. Regardless, I feel comfortable calling myself an artist now, and soon I'll have a paper to confirm it. In 2022, I received my Bachelor of Fine Arts in Graphic Design from the University of Central Arkansas. Going through this program and having to take a required range of courses allowed me to discover my compulsion to tactile image making. I was good at drawing and painting, and admittedly had little patience to learn Adobe's intricate languages and their translations between all their different programs. My senior year, I took my first printmaking course alongside my first mixed media painting course and started a track of material discovery that hasn't really stopped. My practice underwent a lot of changes, but my color affinities have remained a constant element over the 3 years. I'm continually reaching for saturated color, whether I'm starting a planned palette or an intuitive one. However, I have slowly become more aware of the particularities of colors, such as temperature, value, opacity, training those impulses to become more strategic and intentional with application. Color, in my case being pigment and binder, started being used as a nostalgic reference, a connection I could make between my current self and my younger self. I think about myself as a girl who would proudly wear Limited 2 to play in the mud, and who loved Lisa Frank stationery, but could not care at all whether anything matched. A girl blissfully unaware of the complexities that each birthday will bring after puberty. I grew up in the southern United States and never had a chance to travel outside of it until I was 16 and went to San Francisco. My uncle is a designer who specializes in data visualization, and he invited us out to explore the city where he had moved to. The culture shock was insane. The entire ecosystem felt so different from what I had known and felt like a very long adrenaline rush. It was during this trip that I saw an indoor mural by artist Jen Stark. I was at Facebook HQ because he was doing a design project there, and they had a lot of installations by a bunch of different artists. And I saw Jen Stark's mural and was just enthralled by the colors that she was using. If you're not familiar with her work, it's like drippy patterns of neons and blacks and whites, and it's just all focused on, around color, bright colors. Having this guise as a student, especially with my background as an overachieving AP scholar, I subconsciously kept developing rules to follow when it came to creating like it was a math problem. My definition of painting, particularly when it comes to materials, was limited to stretcher bars and canvas or wood panels with paint applied by brushes. Sometime like 2 years ago, Rachel, she asked me about my materials, which prompted me to become more intentional about my media through their physical, historical, and contemporary research. I was searching for a surface material that was soft but strong and could exude a feminine illusion while also being able to hold paint. Multiple fabrics were tested and failed until I saw some silk sitting on my friend Jade. She's in the painting program. I saw some silk sitting on her desk when we were talking one day. I immediately asked her what it was and just started on a deep dive, looking up where I could buy it, what it was made of, just going all in. And ever since then, I've been playing with painting on it, printing on it, painting, then printing on it, stitching on it, and stretching it. Subject-wise, I've always been attracted to graffiti. I've admired it from a TV screen or from a page in a book, typically sources other than real exposure. Going to California and then gaining that exposure of a lived-in city embedded with graffiti heightened that admiration. I carried that throughout my undergraduate experience and experimented with my own graffiti writing and painting and drawing. But as much as I tried, none of the work I was making felt right. I took a break from drawing and painting, particularly representationally, and started to look towards photography. The apartment building I ended up moving into when I got to Houston was in between 2 train tracks, and I was on the 3rd floor with a pretty good view. Sometime in April 2023, I was taking some random pictures of my plants on my windowsill, and a train started to truck by. So I moved the window up a little bit and took a picture, and then just kind of pulled the whole window up, and then was like taking all these pictures and just started spamming my phone. So eventually, opening that window, I started that was my inaugural ritual of holding onto my phone with hopes and dreams while spamming my camera button every time I heard a train pass by. These photos accumulated into a large digital archive that I've been slowly going through and using in my work. Every original photo is cropped and harshly edited into a new monochromatic form. These photos translate into silkscreen layers, intaglio plates, and image transfers where the colors may or may not be changed. Over the time I've been working with these photos, I've become more intentional about playing with edits that push the image's abstraction. The photographic references may be hard to read at times, but I'm interested in the contrast between the subject of the freight train and graffiti versus the soft materiality of the silk and the bright color. Some pieces have a more direct photographic reference to freight cars, typically screen printed in neons and pastels, while some push the boundaries of their extraction through black and white image transfer over top paintings with bright color palettes. The subject of the photos, because they are typically used with materials and colors associative to my gendered experiences, become the opposing masculine force. Steel versus silk, hard versus soft, metal versus fabric. My work collectively looks to disrupt binary understandings of gender by blending symbols of masculinity and femininity. When I first started working with my photos, I began translating them into film suitable for silkscreen. I amassed a variety of editions with these films and explored the implementation of geometric, figural, and gestural elements. Eventually, I began to narrow my layers to be only the photography and made a few editions of the layered 8x10 photos. But then I started looking at Corita Kent. The scrolls upstairs featured in this show are a direct homage to her legacy through their intentional orientation, process, and title. They consist of an unplanned collage of layers used from film from older editions that were cut up, drawing from Corita's reuse of layers in her different editions. Additionally, the long rectangular format mimics Corita's collection of prints, her Heroes and Sheroes from 1968, somewhere around there. And it provides, while also supporting the title's inclusion of the word scroll, the title bearing the word scroll provides an allusion to a long paper containing writing. In this case, however, the interpretation of writing is within the context of graffiti writing. The paintings are a product of a private performance. Similar to singing in the shower, I'm dancing around my studio with paint and painting tools, acting with impulse and judging what marks to make layer by layer, all while generating colorful messes on the side. The tools I use range from ketchup bottles, ruined paintbrushes, scrapers, rags, spray paint, and hand-drawn stencils. I enjoy watching the exchange of color through its physical form, two colors stripping into each other, transparent splatters over top colorful strokes. Spray painting stencils containing subtle shifts in hue and the overlaps between all these elements. My painting style teeters between the paint's control and chaos. The final layer on the large paintings behind me is a large-scale image transfer. I started using this process of pasting laser printed copies, allowing them to dry, and then scrubbing off the paper sometime in my undergrad. I didn't realize I could go beyond the 8.5 by 11 copy page size limit until I was introduced to Kelly and Lindo's work. Through clicking a simple box in the print dialog screen, the printer will automatically tile a large file for you. I started printing my photos in a larger format so I could image transfer them all. So the dark layer you see on these paintings behind me is the toner that was left behind from the pasting and scrubbing away. Through my exploration of photographic reproduction, Pat Masterson, the head of print, introduced me to polymer photogravure. This process allows for a wider tonal range, unlike silkscreen. The layered colored photographs upstairs are prints from steel back plates coated in light-sensitive emulsion. They each went through a process of selective exposure to light, hardening the emulsion in specific areas, followed by washing away the soft emulsion. The plates used to make the prints in this exhibition were created at Flatbed Press in Austin with Matt Magruder. The backlighting effect on the paintings was probably the last decision I made in regards to how I would fabricate and install my work. I was working with the idea of backlighting, but couldn't quite figure out how to actually do it. I had a studio visit with Ann Soul Sister Johnson while she was a visiting artist here, and she was like, strip lights? So I was like, whoa! And started, thinking it through and how I could actually, install the strip lights. I decided to frame these paintings in order to have the backlighting effect. My first impulse to the color of the frames was gold because I am attracted to gold. I wear gold jewelry. But I contemplated how the color could subtly reference steel, leading to my decision of the silver finish. Moving forward, I think I'm going to spend a lot more time reading, probably take a little break from making. I want to discover more history and philosophy and literature. But I also want to spend time with my dog and myself, catching up on all of the things I neglected in my hard pursuit and studies. So yeah, thank you all for being here.
We have time for probably like 2 questions. Either from you guys or from me, because I have many questions. Catherine.
Can you tell us a little bit more about imagery, like the gesture against the grid in the artwork, and how that there's like this interplay? Like, can you kind of maybe walk us through one of the compositions?
Yeah, so the black layer, I typically don't really know where it's going to go exactly while I'm painting. It's like the final layer, and there's only, the grid references because they are tiled. They're tiled reproductions of 8.5 by 11 copy paper, because I can't print a picture this large with a laser printer. So that gives it, the grid kind of format. And what's interesting is that when I first started doing that, I kind of had this impulse to cover it up. And so I started going back in with black paint to try to cover up the grid. But then I was kind of more hesitant to do that because I kind of like the, the effects that it gives, the contrast between, the gestural strokes with the grid over top. So the grid necessarily wasn't intentional to begin with, but I'm happy that it kind of came out that way.
Is there a significance to the scale of these pieces in particular?
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to make something large, and I honestly, the sizing of these was thanks to Garrett Griffin, and Garrett Griffin only, because he gave me a stretcher completely made together. That stretcher for that one, gave it to me, and I decided to just follow the exact same structure for all of the rest. So it was just what I had.
Beautiful. That is not nearly enough time to hear from you, but that's the time that we have. Thank you so much, Hannah, for your work. Multidisciplinary artist Daniel Zamora holds a degree in global art design and construction from Texas A&M. In addition, his time as the national makeup artist and master pigment consultant for Estee Lauder Corporation has deepened his understanding of transformation, illusion, and identity. He will graduate from the University of Houston with an MFA in Interdisciplinary Practices and Emerging Forms. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you so much, and it's an honor to be here, certainly presenting with all of the other talented artists in my cohort, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. So I think the best way to begin is at the beginning. It was a dark and stormy night. Right. So it's a little icebreaker joke that I like to make sometimes. I had my early life, as a child, was definitely informs my work today. And I really like that line, like it was a dark and stormy night, because it was the beginning of so many childhood books for me, which I'll circle back to in just a moment. But at this point, I think it would be really useful for me to make the work that I've already done, like work for us now, which is going to be like me reading the very introduction to my thesis. So, and also, they did an excellent job on the wall text too. So if y'all have a second, then you all please peek at that. So let's begin. The title of my thesis is called A Half Ghost Awakens. It's fascinating to be somewhere and simultaneously not be there. This may be as simple as standing on a city corner with an armful of groceries, waiting to cross the street, while simultaneously inhabiting the memory of when one was 7 years old and playing hide and seek with your friends in the orchard. I've experienced this type of phenomenon on a profound level, primarily due to my experience with alcoholism and drug addiction. Currently, it's called substance use disorder. There are periods of my life when my body was physically present, highly dependent on substances, while my mind and spirit were elsewhere. To this day, I have very little memory of miscellaneous events, but some memories did actually resurface. So my artwork explores the ever-changing nature of being, the multiplicity of time, impermanence, attachment versus liberation, connection versus isolation. So Gertrude Stein's composition as explanation underscores that every creative act is an explanation in and of itself. This is a dynamic process that reflects an ongoing journey of understanding and healing, and integrating Zen Buddhism's concept of impermanence into an experiential reality reinforces the notion that change and flux are both inevitable and deeply enriching. I propose that my art practice serves as an ephemeral composition, a lifelong exercise of working with these themes. Inhabiting a physical and spiritual world is an indescribably rare gift. Existing as a life force capable of being present, mentally considering things of the past, and entertaining notions of the future, all while inhabiting a physical body and a physical world with all of its materiality, is a transcendent experience that comes with great responsibility. I recall a sacred connection and love for life with its multiplicities from an early age. This love and connection ignite my imagination and drive my art practice, which is a facet of my spiritual practice as a Soto Zen Buddhist. The end. All right. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly more that I can say, but I certainly welcome questions. I really believe in the engagement and meeting you all where you're at. So if there's anything pressing, please.
How are these bodies of work, these different artworks here, connected?
So this is, I was very interested in the concept of, the creative challenge for me was how I could create sort of a universe of, that represents moments of awakening and consideration. So these things, and I thought the best way to do this, and Rick Lowe has been my professor for the majority of my time here, my studio professor. I've had John Reed as well. They both refer to like my practice as I'm a universe builder. And so essentially what I've done was I've created this universe called the home world. And in this world, people have these sort of moments of reckoning. So I'm looking to capture these moments that embody ritual, memory, time, practice, and awareness. Now, there's an ambiguity with all of these things. We'll see a lot of times they're all sort of figure-based. And in Homeworld, these works, I strive to embody a seamless present. So these are all sort of moments that are happening in this universe. And I needed to figure out another vehicle from which we could explore the things that the people that inhabited these universes talk about, which is why I created a graphic novel within this world called Ghost House. So this gives us a chance to actually peek into the sorts of conversations that the people that live in this universe are having. And it's been a really effective thing. What's really, really great is I'm writing these stories. They're the themes that I contend with, both as somebody that had been struggling with illness, and now as a person that's had long-term sobriety. And I'm still very active in the recovery community, and I advocate for a number of different organizations. These are the themes that we can sort of explore, these sort of moments of awakening and reckoning, and the real themes that people begin, having. Like this panel here is sort of the origin story of Ghost House. And this sort of starts at like a square one where people may begin with like a spiritual kind of consideration. But it's nice to be able to represent like where people may start, these different points of entry that people have into, what could potentially have been like a hard reset. I know for me, I had to start at the very beginning. My illness had evolved such that I would wake up and I would say like, what do human beings do today? Oh, we brush our teeth. And then I had to do like another thing that I'm actually writing now is I had to learn how to fall asleep again, which is, when we're born, we know how to be awake, we know how to be asleep, we know how to eat, and we know how to go to the bathroom, right? And I had forgotten how to do one of those things. And so these sorts of conversations, I knew even in the midst of my suffering that this was a very valuable experience. And so even though there was a great amount of pain going on, I knew that it merited my attention because it could be useful later on in terms of communicating what these experiences look like. Okay, thank you for your question. Yes?
Can you talk about the sculptures?
Yeah, a big part of, I talk about, what was really great was I have practiced as I mentioned, with the teacher who's the abbot of the Houston Zen Center. For all practical purposes, she's really like the Buddhist equivalent of the Pope. And she's right here in Houston, right? And when I was first getting better years ago, I was really very concerned with the concept of identity because, I had to relearn not only who I was as a person and that was well, but I also had to learn who I in fact was not. So there's a co-arising of the construction of identity as well as the deconstruction of identity. And it became very interesting to me about how we celebrate markers in time and the narrative that we have around birthdays. In fact, most of our time in this lifetime, I had taken this wonderful philosophy class with a man named John McDermott at A&M back in the early 90s. And he was one of the world-renowned Blake authorities. And one of the quotes that he said that was most haunting was that we live 98% of our lives out of obligation. And I just thought, wow, that is astounding. I can barely wrap my head around that. And basically, because I've had so many years to practice this, what he's talking about is that we are constantly telling the story of ourselves. Most of our energy is invested in keeping the story of ourselves alive, not only to ourselves, but to the rest of the world. And one of the ways that we do this is through the ritual of birthday. And so the candles came to signify a marker in how we ritualize these memories, how we ritualize our identities, how we celebrate particular moments. And the way that sort of intersects with Zen Buddhism is that really there's no such thing as an ordinary moment. And in that sense, every single moment, and who can really measure a moment? We have pragmatic and scientific, efforts there. But in terms of measurability, the fact is that in my practice, every single moment deserves its own candle because we are constantly inventing ourselves every single moment. That's the candles. And in this lore that I've created, these are the favorite forest candles. So within the universe of Homeworld, there are favorite forests which house memories and things like that. And these candles naturally occur in this universe, which is why we have curly willow branches that are stemming from the tops instead of candle wicks. Yes?
Since there is such an importance and impermanence to Buddhism, what are your thoughts on conservation of your art?
I'm not really concerned about that. I have no real pragmatic. I mean, look, it's really great. The thing is that if I look at the likelihood that me and many of my friends have overcome one of the most challenging things that our species can do, which is overcome addiction, and that I can go back and I can finish school, that I've got my health. Abbie had mentioned her age. I'm 52 this year. And time happens all at once for me. What's really great, somebody had asked me in my studio, what do you want to be a successful artist? And I'm like, I welcome success in whatever varied form that may mean, but that's really a complex question because it really depends on your measure of success. I strive to be a joyful, fulfilled artist, and once I make these things, I will do my best to preserve them so that I can share this and actually carry the message along, but I have no real control over these sorts of things. This 52 years that I've had felt like it took about 20 to get here, I think the phrase is that I thought getting older would take a lot longer. And I'm thankful for just the opportunity to create, to be part of a community, to have the opportunities to make work, to share it, and things like that. And then I'll do my best to maintain it and to share it, but I don't really invest a lot of energy in those sorts of things. I'm not brimming with the future generations, I probably won't care after I'm dead and gone. But thank you for the question. I certainly understand where it's coming from, but it's all good.
I have a curiosity. which is there a part of Homeworld that you have never been able to express, some like private part of it that you just think about, but it doesn't actually make it into any of your pieces?
No, you know, I really identified with what Abbie said earlier. Like, this work is deeply personal to me. And what I did find was that when I started first generating work, it was coming at a pretty emotional cost, but it didn't weigh on me that heavily because I had already done recovery work and process work, which looks like step work, right? And that is like doing a deep CSI investigation in your life. Like, this is a fearless inventory. You're a private detective in all different facets of your life. We're looking under rocks. We're doing all sorts of things. We're uncovering things. We're discovering things about ourselves. We're tracing back our motivations from early ages. So I had already done a lot of the process work. What I'm really excited about is that there are new ways to tell these stories, which is why, you know, I was like, okay, so Homeworld is beautiful, and I loved these moments, and I loved so fun fact, the people that are in these images are all people in recovery themselves. Now, I created an opportunity. It was very important for me. This body of work here is called The Luminous Life of Half Ghosts. And these are specifically portraits of people in recovery, in various forms of recovery. There's so many things to be in recovery from, all the way from like gambling addiction to Overeaters Anonymous, to Sex and Love Anonymous, to Sex Anonymous, to codependent, you know, this sort of a thing. But the fact is that we're really easy to spot when we're in crisis. But when we're well, we look just like everybody else. And many of us in recovery struggle with what I call the plague of selves. We have issues with self-confidence, self-esteem, self-image, self-worth. And I wanted to create a safe space where these people, of course we end up with a photograph, but I wanted to create a safe space where we could have conversations where they felt supported, emotionally safe and secure, that we might be able to capture a glimpse of them as their true character allows and reveals. And this is another way of telling that story. Another vehicle is this piece called Luca of the Dream, when I've created basically a fox character. He's a fox spirit that inhabited this homeworld, a facet of the homeworld. Now, in this lore, in the homeworld, there are haunted forests that exist sort of alongside the favorite forests. Do we have time for me to go into a quick explanation story? I don't want to overtake it.
Let's take 5 minutes.
Okay, great.
And then we can do lunch.
So, all right, I won't take up the whole my 5 minutes. But so, in the same spirit, you know, I got really nerdishly curious about my recovery. Like, I never intended. Nobody really intends to be really, really sick too. But the truth is that I turned to alcohol when I was a child, and I had no idea about the consequences of the decisions that I was making at all. I was a kid. Kids make mistakes. Adults make mistakes. And I just had no idea what was in store for me, or else today I do not regret the past at all. And I think I'm a much better person for having experienced these things. But that kid had no idea what he was getting into, you know? And I have a lot of compassion for him. But what I did find through working the steps of recovery was that I was really curious in terms of like uncovering these mysteries of my life and what that path actually meant. And I habituated this sort of curiosity. I started to ask the origin story of a lot of different things that were going on in my life. Oh, or like, where did that phrase come from? Or how did that story begin? And one of the favorite meditations that we do at the Zen Center is called the loving kindness meditation. I've loved that meditation for, you know, through the duration of my practice. And I asked one of our priests one day, like, what's the story with the loving kindness meditation? And as it turns out, the story is that Buddha had sent a group of monks to a remote forest for the sake of practice, you know, for the benefit of all beings. The monks made a pilgrimage out there. When they arrived, they became deeply frightened. They ran back to the Buddha and they said, it's impossible to practice in this forest. It's deeply haunted. There's demons, there's spirits. Then the Buddha's answer was, wait here, I'm going to equip you with one of the most powerful things imaginable. And when he returned, he had written the loving kindness meditation, which effectively is an invitation for all beings to exist harmoniously through all space and time. So basically these demons and spirits were pacified because they weren't threatened by the radiance and the virtue of the Buddha and the practitioners. And so I thought, well, that's such an interesting concept. What might it have been like to be one of these like demons to have suddenly been pacified? Like, there is a place to belong. There is a point of entry. There is a place for me. I don't have to invest this precious life energy into being angry or just quieted and all these different things. And I was like, and of course I drew an immediate parallel to recovery. And so this is when Luca of the Dream was created. I was inspired to create this maybe at once like demonic fox who at once was a really malevolent spirit, but then actually realized that there was a place for him and peace for him. And he came back to tell this story. He rejoins the dream of life, which is why it's called Luca of the Dream. And through the vehicle of Luca, I share the stories of recovery about what it had been like to, of course, it's like abstracted storytelling. I draw my inspiration from like the likes of Laurie Anderson and the performances of Maya Matreyek, I believe. And so this is another interesting way to bring these things to life through my art practice as well. So they're all, this is another example of how we're all connected. There's interbeing, there's interdependence, and the same is true for my art.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Absolutely. Thank you all.